When I think of a story that I would term as epic, the assumption that the story is long goes hand in hand. And often this assumption is valid. It takes time to build an interesting world, to develop complex characters, and make a story that really resonates. Today, though, I get to talk about a story that breaks this rule. Despite only containing 5 volumes, it has one of the best developed high fantasy worlds I've seen, a heartbreaking romance, intense action, and thought-provoking mystery. Ladies and gentlemen, may I present Shuumatsu Nani Shitemasu ka Isogashii desu ka Sukutte Moratte Ii desu ka. Or as it's called in English, what are you doing at the end? Are you busy? Can you save me? A story that is both epic and concise in everything other than its title. SukaSuka is a post-apocalyptic story, but rather than being set in a nuked-out Earth, it's set in a high fantasy world. Instead of nukes, the appearance of super monsters called beasts wiped out almost all of humanity, along with several other races. The only survivors were those who fled to floating islands in the sky, out of the reach of the beasts. Our story follows the last remaining human, Willem. Just before the apocalypse, he was turned to stone, as the result of various curses, and then is awakened 500 years later by some scavengers. He mopes around a bit, taking on some odd jobs to cover the medical expenses he racked up while being de-stoned, until he gets a job for the military to guard a weapons cache. As per standard light novel logic, it turns out that these weapons are little girls called fairies, who happen to wield ridiculously large swords and fight off any beasts that ever manage to reach the island. The rest of the story is then split between Willem's attempt to take care of the fairies and a gradual unraveling of the mysteries surrounding the end of the world. Willem has a backstory that would generally form the main story for a battle shonen protagonist. He was a talentless young boy who went on to become one of the strongest heroes of humanity through sheer effort and hard work. But unlike most battle shonen protagonists, he didn't have the benefit of plot armor. When we see him at the start of the story, he can no longer fight due to his past injuries and is pretty broken mentally too. Meeting the fairies, however, gives him a new purpose in life, and he strives to keep them safe, even if he's just limited to taking care of them outside of battles and then waiting for them to return from them. Our other main character is Catholi, the oldest fairy at the ripe old age of 15. Yeah, fairies don't survive fighting beasts for all that long. Anyways, she develops a huge crush on Willem shortly after meeting him, and while it looks like she might be going all tsundere for a bit, she quickly comes to terms with her feelings and tells Wilhelm. She is stubborn, cute, and a bit immature in some ways, while being very mature in others, given how often she has to face death. The rest of the cast includes the motherly Negletho, who is surprisingly attractive given she's a troll, Frick, a scavenger friend of William's, belonging to a race of what are essentially goblins, though the story calls them Borgles for whatever reason, Nephrin, a bookworm fairy, and many more. Generally, the cast is well developed, although more of the fairies are given names than are actually relevant to the plot, so I completely forget about some of them. Generally in a story where characters fight for their existence, the protagonist is the one doing the fighting. So it's quite refreshing instead to have one where we focus on those who are stuck behind, waiting for the brave warriors to come back. It adds a great deal more emotional depth and shows how, in some ways, waiting for those who you love to come back and not knowing what's going on can be much more stressful than being the one who's actually doing the fighting. The story really manages to capitalize on those emotions to make some very touching scenes. The world building in the story is also brilliant. With little text spent on dry descriptions, the author somehow manages to create a world I would love to explore, and weave in thousands of years of history. I think it certainly helps that there's a large mystery as to the cause of the world ending, and as that mystery slowly unravels through the course of the story, we learn a lot about the world itself. If the goal of a high fantasy story is to transport you to a magical world, then this story has certainly succeeded in that respect. Writing this section was a bit of a struggle for me because I genuinely love this story and can find very little to fault it with. That being said, if I'm going to nitpick, I did find the romance between Willem and Cathulli advanced a bit too quickly. Normally, I would praise a series for having a romance that went somewhere in a decent amount of time. What with all the never-ending and never-resolved romances that can be found in light novels and anime, but in this case, there just wasn't enough development. Part of this was likely due to the series being quite short, but that doesn't really excuse it. A lot of emotion in this series hangs around the relationship between Willem and Cathulli, so they really needed to spend some more time together. Actually, as we're talking about lack of time, I also felt like a couple of important characters, who I will not name due to spoilers, really could have used some more time devoted to them too. They had interesting personalities and all, but they essentially became throwaway tropes due to their lack of development. So the general takeaway from this review should be, please read this story! It is easily one of the best light novels I've read in a long time and would highly recommend it to pretty much anyone. I would like to extend a huge thanks to F. Gillen Translations, who did a great job translating this series, and I apologize if I mispronounced your name. I've put a link to his translation in the description below. For those who have already read this and are looking for something similar, I would recommend Black Bullet. It is the same little girls fighting monsters in post-apocalyptic world thing going for it, though it leans a bit more towards sci-fi than fantasy. Anyways, thank you for listening to this review. I hope you enjoyed it. Cheers!